Every barn has a story. The barn and the farm go hand in hand. If you had a farm, you needed a barn. The purpose of the barn was to house the animals and store the crops. As one goes, so goes the other. If they stop farming and stop using the barn, it takes about 10 years and the barn gets into disrepair and a lot of them fall down. And so there's been a movement to tear down these barns. This needs preserved and needs to be written down so that it can be passed on. Hello, my name is Clair Kriner. I have probably photographed, documented somewhere around 500 different barns. And my one theme throughout my series of books was every barn has a story. Some are more interesting than others, but the barn and the farm go hand in hand. When I first started doing the local barns, I had the choices of getting the pictures or getting the information, and I wanted to get the pictures first. The one thing I learned with the old timers, when you sat down to talk, you better make sure that you had an hour, because you could easily spend an hour visiting with these folks. But many of them, they tell me about their farm and barn, about any of the other family barns that were nearby, the neighbors' barns, and barns 5 miles down the road that they remembered as a kid. So it was they had a wealth of information that they were glad to share. We're looking at 100 to 150 year history, and the construction has changed over those years, and the types of barns that we've seen in this area, one of the most common is the bank barn, where it's built into the hillside, and you have a barn bridge to the upper level where the crops are stored, and then they house the animals down in the lower level. And I've always said gravity was a farmer's friend. As you were moving the straw or the hay down for feed and fodder, you used pitchforks and dropped it down through the various holes. There was the early timber frame barns, mortise and tenon timbers joined by the wooden pins. And from 1875 to about 1925 would be the golden age, or the traditional timber frame barns that are mostly existing in our area.
What I remember mostly, and my dad was the youngest brother, and my grandpa lived with us, and he constantly, many times, talked about a carpenter that built his barn over there, and his name was John Mooney. And coincidentally, this young lady is John Mooney's great-granddaughter. My grandpa was so impressed by John Mooney and his carpentry skills. John Mooney didn't use a claw hammer, he used a hatchet. And when the siding, sheeting, any of the 1-inch boards was used in the construction of the barn, they used 10-penny nails, and he always started a 10-penny nail with one hit with the hatchet, and the second hit drove it. So obviously he was hitting that nail pretty hard. And he worked 10 hours and always filed his saw on his own time. And that impressed my grandpa.
This barn, built soon after the Civil War, and as my great-great-grandmother said that the carpenters never had a square corner in anything they built, but this barn has stood the test of time. A lot of chestnut, a lot of white pine, all original lumber from this farm, from the 100-acre farm here.
This barn was situated out here closer to Stanton, about a half-mile away. So they moved it down here and rebuilt it, reassembled it. 1845 something. And then the two, Jacob and his one brother, and I'm not sure which one, then moved into this. One of them had a wife, and they actually lived in it for a few years while they did other arrangements with the farm. There was other dwellings that they built on the farm in the woods that the other brothers moved into, but this was the main, thing. And I think it was primarily because of the spring location across the road. That far wall, that's the barn bridge for the addition to this barn. That is, they call that stacked field stone. Somebody had a rough couple of weeks putting those together. And if you look at the timbers up here, the family story is that all these timbers came off of this farm. So, there's the ones over on the far side are at least 40 feet long, one piece. And then at this beam here, they added another piece on. But you just look at the size of these. A lot of them are chestnut, but there's also oak and maple and some pine mixed in. But yeah, the majority of this barn is made up of chestnut. The same with the Broadacres barn.
Around 1920, we ran out of timbers, out of trees. The timber industry had cut a majority of the trees down, and a few of the farms left themselves a timber lot. But these older barns, they had timbers that were 8, 10, 12 inches square, 40 to 60, some 80 feet long. And by 1920, there were not enough trees to continue constructing barns with those timbers. So I defined a category as a transitional timber framed, where they would go to the sawmill and they would cut the 2x8s and put 3 of them together to get a big enough beam. Around 1940s, 1950s, after World War II, we went into the modern era, what we would call the pole barn, where with the 6x6s or whatever, and getting into treated lumber, they could stick the poles in the ground, put the purlins around the sides, and put the traditional siding or the steel siding on. That began an era of the modern pole barn or agricultural building. Over the years, there were barns that caught my eye. A few of those would be what I call the Hatton barn on 322 over at Emmerichville. 36 north of Brookville has the Broadacres barn, which is two barns built beside each other and connected. And that is part of the Wrights family, which has a great history. And the Octagon barn, I'd heard about it, and took me a while to find it. But again, that is a beautiful landmark in the area, and there's a lot of history related to that barn. There's a couple nice barns down around the Punxsy area. On 119 south of Punxsy is the Cunningham barn, which is a landmark in that area. And going north of Punxsy on 119, there is the London dairy farm, which goes back to the Brown family, which was featured in the Caldwell's Atlas. So that one has a lot of history with it, even though the barn has been replaced. In my one book, I featured the mill pouch barns, and that is an American tradition and icon in the area. The tobacco company that marketed mill pouch would send painters out each year, and they would paint the advertising on the barns, and it preserved the barn for the farmers and gave them a little bit of money for the advertising. And the company was centered out of West Virginia. So West Virginia in Pennsylvania have the most barns. Another nice one that is nearby on 322 outside of Strattonville is one that has been maintained and restored, and those are the best ones in our area. My new slogan is preserving our rich agricultural heritage, because there were so many families where they didn't know the story and didn't know the history, and a lot of them, we were these old timers that were over 70, between 70 and 90. You know, when they pass on, most of that history is lost. Take a drive down a country road and look around, and you know, as you pass these farms, just pause in your mind and wonder what the history and the story is. And if you have time and you drive up to the house and somebody's around, you know, if you ask them questions, these old farmers, they're willing to take time out and tell you their story. If they're busy, they'll just politely ask you to tell you they've got work to do, and just respect that with them, that you'll have a rewarding experience if you do stop and talk to anybody.